Hi, well, congratulations. You have survived January. We are now into February. Hopefully, spring is on the way. And even better than spring being on the way and January being over is the news that this weekend we have the return of the Six Nations. We have England versus India in the subcontinent in the cricket, and we have the Aussie Open coming up next Monday. So, plenty to discuss. Let's get underway with the cricket, which has generated plenty of headlines already this year. We're going to start actually not with England, India. News this morning, Australia have pulled out of their tour against South Africa. It is not a surprise. We've got the South African variant of COVID that is scaring the entire world. Australia obviously has gone for elimination strategy with COVID, so takes it slightly differently to other countries. And also, England did tour South Africa on limited overs tour in December, which ended up being cut halfway through because of breaches of security in the bio bubbles with positive tests. So not a surprise, that one. But speaking of England, they've flown from Sri Lanka to India. They've done their 8 days quarantine. They are out and they are ready to play. A 4-test series against India starts on Friday, 4 a.m. UK time. 2 matches in Chennai, followed by 2 matches in Ahmedabad. The best news is the 3rd test is a day-nighter, which means it kicks off at 9 a.m. UK time, which is nice and civilised for those of us who like their sleep. But first test, 4 a.m. this Friday on a pitch which will take probably some spin later on. You'll most certainly want to bat first if you win the toss. And obviously India at the moment have a pretty mighty pace attack alongside their more traditional spinners. So will be an interesting one. Interesting to see what sort of pitch is prepared. Obviously, if they prepare one that suits the quicks, that will also suit Anderson or Broad, whoever we play out of those two, since we don't seem to play them in conjunction anymore. So yeah, plenty to look forward to. Just a reminder, England are rotating their players because they've got a very, very heavy schedule this year. Pretty much every match they're playing is against a top nation. They haven't got any sort of gimmies as such. So because of that, they are rotating, which means they won't be putting out their best 11 probably for any of the 4 tests, which is a real shame. They don't go to India that often. They certainly don't go to India with the chance of winning that often. So we'll have to see how that evolves and who ends up in the starting 11 on Friday. The other thing coming up this weekend, which is very, very exciting, is the start of the Six Nations. There's something about the Six Nations, the fact it kicks off at the beginning of February, so it already means you've survived January, the traditional worst month of the year. The fact that it finishes in spring, which means that's just around the corner. And obviously, especially for us in lockdown, that just generally means better days are coming. Still a little bit of housekeeping to do with the Six Nations. We don't know the situation in France. They obviously cancelled their cup games a few weeks ago. At the moment, teams are supposed to be quarantining in and out of France, whereas they can move freely around the UK. We don't know if that's going to be exempt under an elite sport rule. We obviously hope so. It shouldn't actually matter too much until the end of the tournament, because at the moment the teams going into France are going in around rest weekends, so they will have the time to quarantine before and after if necessary. But towards the end, when there's back-to-back weekends at the end of the tournament, that becomes a bit tricky. But it does mean there's a month to sort this out for the powers that be. France, obviously one of the favourites. The bookies have England as the favourites, but France number 2. Quite frankly, I think France are going to be the team to watch. They've been playing champagne rugby in about the last year, their traditional style. It's great to watch. We saw their young guns run England really, really close in that final of the sort of rearranged autumn internationals late last year, even though they were resting a lot of their top players. They do have a few key injuries though, so that could prove costly. England, as I said, are favourites. They've got a very strong squad. They've lost Launchbury and Marler, as we discussed last time out, but they are still a pretty well, the strength and depth is just insane in the England team at the moment. But Fortress Twickenham, of course, will be silent. There are currently no plans to have fans, certainly for the first few weekends. We will see what the situation is later in the tournament as it comes to its conclusion towards the end of March. Wales are a recovering side. They're looking better than they have done for a while. Ireland, for once, have not peaked midway through a World Cup cycle, which bodes well for the World Cup in 2 years' time, but doesn't necessarily bode well for this tournament. They certainly look strong, especially at home, if home advantage is still a thing. So yeah, Ireland, France, England are probably going to be the ones to watch. Scotland are going to push them close. They've got Finn Russell back, which is obviously great news for them. And all that means is Italy will be looking probably at the wooden spoon again. But for Italy, they may well play Sergio Parisse, their absolute talisman. He's right at the tail end of his career. He was supposed to retire in the World Cup a couple of years ago before a certain typhoon put paid to those plans, and then he's had a bit of an iffy relationship with the federation ever since, with a little bit of club versus country going on. But hopefully we'll see him on the pitch, hopefully at his absolute best, and very hopefully Italy might actually push someone a bit closer, or at least get some points on the board, which would be great to see. Apologies for my dog in the background there, who has just woken up. Six Nations kicks off on Saturday with Italy versus France. Then we have England, Scotland, and then Wales and Ireland are on Sunday. Wales-Ireland has always been a bit of a grudge match, often quite a dirty match, often a lot of studs on show, so we will have to see what happens with that lot, and we will of course be back with a roundup on Monday. Speaking of Monday, start of the Aussie Open. February means we are out of the whining territory for the tennis players. The 72 who were on COVID-affected flights are out of their hard quarantine. They're at Melbourne Park, they're practising, they're playing warm-up matches. So hopefully that is one story done and dusted, although it remains to be seen what sort of form they're in and whether or not that hard quarantine will affect results moving forward. The top players ended up in Adelaide. They played some exhibition matches already. Djokovic pulled out with some blisters on his hand, but you'd still expect him to be heavy favourite going into the tournament, especially with no Federer, no Murray. Nadal, who has a horrendous injury record in Australia, fantastically has now done his back in. So he's already pulled out of a match, and it remains to be seen if he will be fit enough to play a significant role in the tournament moving forward. Over on the women's side, Ash Barty has been back in action for the first time in the best part of a year. That is amazing to see. She pretty much chose to stay put in Australia. A very sensible decision. It meant her life went back to normal a lot quicker. It meant she could practice and so on and so forth. But she has been lacking competitive matches. So it's great to see her back in action, and I think quite a few people would love to see her win this one. Simona Halep also looks good. Azarenka was one of the 72 who did the hard quarantine. She tends to go well here. Osaka's already looking good. Serena Williams says the delay to the Aussie Open has given her time to get fit from an Achilles injury she picked up at the US Open last year. She's looking strong, and even Venus, at the age of 40, is still giving some of the younger players a run around. So there's 6 separate tournaments currently going on at Melbourne to give the players the best chance of being match fit come next Monday. So that's what's going on in those 3. So we're looking at some really good couple of weeks of sport coming up. I did mention the Olympics last time out. There was a big meeting at the IOC last week. They have not reached a resolution other than to continue on assuming it's going to happen. There are now obviously growing rumours about no fans, which will be odd, but we're starting to get used to it. No fans in the Six Nations is going to be huge, especially it's going to contrast with the fact there will be fans at the Aussie Open because Australia has no community transmission of COVID, which does show what is possible, and there's still plenty of time before the Olympics gets underway in July, so I think the poor old athletes are just going to have to keep going, assuming it's all going to happen. Over in Formula One world, still no contract for Hamilton. We're into February, which means the cars will be revealed at car launches this month ahead of pre-season testing next month. And just to round that one off, Pierre Gasly for AlphaTauri has COVID. He's the 6th driver to test positive, and he's isolating and seems to be okay. So we wish him all the best. So there's your roundup for this week. We'll be back next weekend to give you some updates from the cricket, to give you some updates from those warm-up tournaments in Melbourne, see who's looking good, who might be heading into the tournament as favourites, and of course we'll bring you all the news from the Six Nations. So hopefully catch you later this week.